It begins in a silence so deep that it almost hums, a place where the echoes of the physical world no longer reach. The case was recorded late one winter evening, when a request came through from a family desperate for answers. They had lost someone suddenly, but it wasn't the manner of death that weighed heaviest on them. It was the knowing, the gnawing ache, that in the final moments, this soul had been drowning in an ocean of despair. What unfolded in the description that followed was not a scene of peaceful departure, nor a simple fading into another realm. It was a journey through the kind of spiritual night that few ever speak of, where the light of one's own essence grows dim, and the horizon offers no sign of dawn. In the account, the soul was first seen standing just beyond the physical form, yet the posture was heavy, as though the air itself had turned to lead. This was not the weight of a body, but the crushing density of emotions, unspoken, regrets unresolved, and self-judgment so sharp it cut through every layer of awareness. Imagine standing in a room where every mistake you've ever made plays on repeat, only louder, only more vivid, only stripped of every comforting lie you once told yourself. The surroundings themselves seemed to reflect this inner state. There was no clear landscape, only a dim and shifting shadow world, as if the soul were trapped inside the outline of their own grief. What struck those who heard the reading was the description of the soul's voice. It was not a scream, it was not even a whisper. It was more like a sound carried on, thought, a silent cry that reverberated through the unseen, searching for something it could not name. In the physical world, the family had felt powerless, unaware of the depth of this suffering, until it was too late. But in the spiritual account, it became clear that even in this state, that cry had been heard, not by human ears but by a network of unseen witnesses who monitor such thresholds with unblinking attention. The darkest hour was not described as a single moment. It was a stretching of time, an expansion of feeling, where seconds could feel like centuries, because nothing existed but the soul's own self-imposed confinement. Every attempt to reach outward seemed to collapse inward again, as if the air surrounding them was made of mirrors, reflecting only their own pain. There was no perception of guides or loved ones nearby, even though they were present. It was as though the soul's vision had narrowed to a tunnel so tight that the entire universe had been reduced to a private purgatory. What makes this stage so haunting is not the presence of evil or punishment, but the absence of awareness that anything else exists. The soul believes this is all there is, that the last breath was a closing door, and the place beyond it is simply the perfect prison designed to match the darkest corner of their own mind. And yet, within that description was something even more chilling, the sense that this was familiar to the soul. This was not a brand new darkness, but a return to a vibration they had touched before, in moments of life when despair had outweighed hope. Only now, there were no distractions, no sunlight breaking through, no duties to pull them forward. The person receiving the reading could not stop trembling as they listened. The idea that the one they loved had not immediately stepped into light or peace, but instead, into a place that magnified their suffering was unbearable. Yet, the account was not without a thread of hope. It was explained that no cry, even the faintest vibration of yearning for something more, goes unnoticed. There are those on the other side whose sole focus is to detect that frequency, to stand watch at the edge of the deepest night, ready to move the moment the soul's awareness flickers toward the possibility of help. This is why the description of the cry is so important. It is not always a conscious plea. Sometimes it is as subtle as the moment a soul thinks, "I wish this wasn't all there was." That thought alone sends a ripple through the unseen currents, alerting rescuers who then begin their approach. In the case that night, the reading revealed that these presences had already gathered just beyond the soul's field, but were waiting, not from neglect, but from a law older than the stars themselves. The soul must give some form of consent, however small, before the darkness can be interrupted. And so the reading left the listeners with a truth both heartbreaking and empowering. Heartbreaking, because the darkest hour is real, and there are souls who linger in it far longer than we might wish. Empowering, because no one is truly alone there, even when they cannot feel otherwise. The cry that no one hears is never actually unheard. It may travel in silence, it may be hidden beneath layers of regret and shame, but it still reaches beyond the walls the soul has built. And when it does, the unseen world begins to shift. preparing for the moment when that faintest opening will allow the first spark of light to enter. This account, etched into the records of those who witnessed it, serves as a reminder of how fragile, yet enduring, the human spirit is. Even in the hour when it believes it has been abandoned, it is still held. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of the darkest hour, that the night is never truly empty, and dawn waits patiently for the courage to open the eyes again. It doesn't happen all at once. Hopelessness rarely arrives like a sudden storm. It seeps in slowly, quiet and patient, until one day it has taken root so deeply that it becomes the atmosphere you live in. For the soul, this is not just an emotion, but a density that clings to every layer of its being. It is like trying to move through water that has turned to thick oil, where every thought, every breath, every attempt to rise feels met with a downward pull. You don't just feel heavy, you become heavy. The body may look the same on the outside, but the inner light is muffled, wrapped in layers of dimness that filter every experience into shades of gray. This weight isn't random. It's woven from threads of grief, disappointment, guilt, and the quiet accumulation of moments when you convinced yourself you weren't enough. Every unhealed wound adds another layer to the mass, and over time, the soul begins to bend under the pressure. This bending isn't visible in the physical sense, but if you could see the energetic body, you'd notice it curling inward, almost like a person shivering against an invisible cold. The aura that once extended outward with curiosity and engagement begins to draw in close, as if trying to protect what little light is left inside. In this state, even joy feels suspect. Moments that should lift you instead pass through this thickened field and lose their color before they can reach you. The soul stops trusting light because the darkness has been there for so long, it begins to feel like the only truth. And here's the most dangerous part. When hopelessness becomes familiar, it starts to masquerade as stability. You stop trying to reach for anything brighter, because the idea of moving through that heaviness feels impossible. Energetically, this density disrupts the natural flow of life force. It slows the currents that feed your vitality, making you feel tired even when your body has had rest. It creates pockets of stagnation in your field, where certain emotions get stuck and keep looping back into your awareness. You might notice that the same thoughts come over and over again, like an echo chamber built within your own mind. These are not just thoughts, they are the shape the weight has taken, the grooves it has carved into your inner landscape. And yet, there's something important to understand. This heaviness is not just a byproduct of despair, it is also a kind of signal. In the spiritual realms, this density can be perceived as a flare that says, help is needed here. Guides and higher beings often feel the pull of that signal, though it doesn't always mean they can immediately intervene. The soul's free will plays a role, and as strange as it sounds, there are times when part of the journey is to feel the full measure of that weight before the shift begins. What's most devastating about this state is how it begins to fracture self-identity. You start to forget the version of yourself that was light, curious, and connected. The memory of that vitality fades, and the darkness whispers that it was never real to begin with. This is how hopelessness becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. The heavier it gets, the harder it is to remember that there was ever another way to be. On a deeper level, the density also affects perception. You no longer see the same possibilities that were once available to you. Even if they stand right in front of you, they appear muted or invisible, like looking through glass that has been fogged over. This is not because the opportunities aren't there, it's because the energy field around the soul distorts the light coming in. And yet, in the heart of that weight, there is always a spark that cannot be extinguished. It might be small, so small you'd think it had gone out completely, but it's there. That spark is what keeps the soul tethered, even when it believes it's completely alone. It waits for the smallest shift, the tiniest crack in the density, to flare into something larger. Sometimes, that shift comes through an act of kindness, sometimes through a moment of surrender, and sometimes through a force that feels almost otherworldly. This is the paradox of the weight that cracks the spirit. It feels like an ending, but in the deepest sense, it is also a threshold. It can press a soul to the breaking point, but it is often at that breaking point that the first light finds a way in. The same heaviness that isolates can also create the perfect conditions for transformation, but only if the soul can allow itself to believe, even faintly, that it is still worth saving. In the accounts of those who have glimpsed beyond the threshold, there is a detail that unsettles more than almost anything else: the way the light of a soul can seem to dim. Not in the sense of vanishing completely, for the core of life within it is eternal, but in a way that makes it appear as though its glow has been smothered beneath layers of shadow and weight. In the spiritual realms, this radiance is not decoration. It is identity, presence, and communication all at once. The light of a soul tells the truth of where it has been, what it carries, and what it is ready to become. When that light weakens, it is felt by everything and everyone around it. It sends out a signal that the soul is in a state of contraction, retreating inward rather than expanding outward, and this changes the way the unseen world responds. In life, you might think of it as the difference between someone who walks into a room smiling, their energy inviting others to connect, versus someone whose body language and gaze tell you they cannot be reached. On the other side, this is not about body language, it is about vibration. A bright soul radiates like the sun, drawing helpers, guides, and kin from all directions. A dimmed one becomes harder to see, not because others do not care, but because the nature of the spiritual plane honors resonance. Light meets light. When a soul dims itself, the bridge between it and others becomes fogged, as though looking through darkened glass. The reasons for this dimming vary, but in the cases tied to the darkest hour, it often comes from an overwhelming identification with failure, loss, or guilt. It is as if the soul's own light becomes too painful for it to bear, because that light also illuminates the truth of its choices and the opportunities it turned away from. To keep from seeing these things, the soul instinctively draws its own glow inward, pulling a kind of spiritual curtain across itself. From the soul's perspective in that state, this can feel like safety, hiding from a gaze that would see too much. But from a higher perspective, it is like placing yourself in a windowless room while the world outside is searching for you with open arms. This dimming is not a punishment inflicted by anything outside of the soul. It is a self-created state, born from the belief that it deserves to remain unseen. Yet, there is a subtle danger here, for in the spiritual realms, perception shapes reality far more directly than it does on earth. When a soul believes it is small, unworthy, or beyond repair, its light reflects that belief. The glow becomes thin and wavering, the colors muted. In some readings of these moments, it is described as though the light is still there but hidden under ash, not destroyed, but obscured. There is another layer to this phenomenon. In the physical world, you can fake confidence, smile through pain, and carry on without anyone truly knowing what storms rage inside. In the spiritual world, there is no such disguise. Your light is the sum of your truth in that moment. This is why dimming is not something that can be concealed. Others may not force themselves into your space without consent, but the dimness sends out a signal all the same, and it tells a story without words. Those who tend to souls in this state know the look of a dimmed light instantly. It is not the absence of beauty. In fact, it is often heartbreaking precisely because the beauty is still there, buried under the heaviness. One of the more haunting aspects of this dimming is how it alters the soul's own self-awareness. Imagine holding a lantern in your hands, but deciding to cover it with cloth. The world around you fades into shadow, and you begin to believe there is nothing beyond the immediate darkness. The truth, that you are the one holding the light, becomes harder and harder to recall. In some cases, the soul even forgets it has a light at all, mistaking the darkness for its new nature. This forgetfulness is part of what makes the darkest hour so disorienting. Yet, the dimmed light is never truly lost. Those who can see beyond the soul's own perception know that the flame at the center is untouched, no matter how much shadow surrounds it. The question is whether the soul will allow even a sliver of that light to show again. In certain accounts, the smallest act, a moment of curiosity, a flicker of willingness to see something other than the self-made night, causes a spark to slip through the cracks. And when it does, the entire atmosphere begins to change. It is not that the light suddenly returns at full force. It is more like a sunrise barely cresting the horizon, faint at first, yet undeniable. It is also said that other beings in the spiritual realms respond to the quality of a soul's light, much like travelers in the wilderness respond to a campfire in the distance. A steady, bright flame draws them in swiftly. A dim, struggling ember brings a different kind of approach, slower, more cautious, so as not to frighten or overwhelm. They cannot rush the process, for the light must strengthen from within, or it will not hold. If they were to flood it with too much energy too soon, the soul might recoil, clinging even tighter to its shadows. This is why understanding the dimming is so crucial. From the perspective of the living, it may be tempting to imagine the afterlife as an immediate transition into wholeness, but the reality is more intricate. A soul that has carried deep wounds or crushing self-judgment does not always lay these burdens down the instant it steps out of the body. In fact, the release of the physical can sometimes make these feelings more intense because there is nothing left to distract from them. Without the body, without the routines of daily living, the soul is faced with itself in the purest form. In the cases where the dimming is profound, the first steps toward renewal are often imperceptible to the soul experiencing them, a softening of the air, a faint warmth that wasn't there before. An awareness, however fleeting, that something or someone has noticed them, and slowly, as trust begins to stir, the cloth over the lantern shifts. Light spills into the darkness, not in a burst but in a steady seep. The soul may not even realize that it is the one allowing this to happen. It simply begins to feel less alone. The dimmed light, then, is not the end of the story. It is a chapter, one that may last minutes, or what feels like lifetimes, but it is always a stage on the way to something greater. The brilliance that once defined the soul can be reclaimed, and when it is, it often shines with a depth and richness it did not have before, because it has passed through shadow and survived. The realms beyond watch for this moment with patience, knowing that when the light returns, it carries with it the strength of every shadow it has outlasted. And perhaps that is why even in the darkest hour, there is no true abandonment, for the light, however dimmed, is always there, waiting for the courage to be seen again. It begins like a quiet drift away from everything that once felt familiar. At first, the soul doesn't even notice the distance forming, just a slight dulling of warmth, a subtle fading of connection. But slowly, the threads that tied it to the voices of guidance, to the gentle sense of being held in something larger, begin to feel thin and frayed. It is not that the help has vanished. It is not that love has been withdrawn. The veil of isolation is woven from the inside, forming like a mist around the soul's awareness, until it can no longer sense what still surrounds it. This veil is unlike any ordinary form of loneliness. Ordinary loneliness can still leave space for hope, for the possibility that someone will walk through the door or reach out their hand. This kind of isolation feels more final, as if the soul has been sealed in a room with walls that breathe but will not open. Even the thought of calling out for help feels futile, because it seems certain that no one will hear. This belief is the most dangerous part, because it convinces the soul to stop reaching. It doesn't realize that guidance is still speaking, still present, still waiting, but the density of despair has made its own atmosphere, one that muffles those higher frequencies like thick cloth pressed against the ears. From the soul's perspective, it feels abandoned. The usual inner nudges, the quiet reassurances, the dreams that used to carry messages, all seem to fade. Prayers feel like they evaporate before they've even left the mind. Signs and synchronicities that once brought comfort are either missed entirely or dismissed as meaningless coincidences. The veil convinces the soul that it is truly on its own, and in that belief, the isolation grows even deeper. What is not often understood is that the veil is not a punishment, nor is it the absence of love. It is more like a side effect of the emotional and energetic state the soul is in. When hopelessness thickens around the spirit, it alters its ability to perceive higher vibrational energies. It's like being underwater and trying to hear a voice calling from above the surface. The sound is there, but distorted, faint, and easy to misinterpret. The higher realms never stop broadcasting their light, but the reception has been clouded by layers of fear, grief, and the heaviness of self-doubt. And yet, even in this hour, the unseen help does not retreat. Guides often draw even closer, positioning themselves at the edges of the soul's perception, waiting for the smallest crack in the veil. They send impressions, symbols, and feelings, hoping that one will slip through the barrier. But here's the truth: in these moments, the soul rarely recognizes the origin of the help. If a stranger shows unexpected kindness, it might dismiss it. If a sudden thought offers a solution, it might attribute it to mere coincidence. The veil doesn't just block the sense of connection, it also distorts how events are interpreted. This is why the darkest hour feels so unbearably long. Without the sense of being guided, without the warmth of knowing that love surrounds you, each minute stretches into something heavier than time. The soul feels like it is walking through an endless night without stars, convinced there is no dawn. But this perception is not the ultimate truth, it is a temporary blindness. In fact, some traditions believe that the veil itself is a kind of spiritual training ground, a way to test the soul's ability to keep moving forward even when it cannot see the path. On the other side of this veil, the spiritual landscape is often busy with activity. Beings of light hold vigil. Loved ones who have passed may stand nearby, radiating reassurance even if it cannot be felt. The soul's own higher self is constantly sending out waves of remembrance, whispering, "You are not alone. You never have been." These messages pass through the veil in fragments, sometimes as sudden moments of relief that seem to come from nowhere, or as dreams that leave a lingering peace upon waking. There is also another truth, and it is one that the soul often resists. The veil is not entirely imposed. On some level, it is chosen. Not consciously, not in a way that feels deliberate, but as a reaction to the pain and heaviness pressing in. When we hurt deeply, we tend to close ourselves to avoid further harm. But in closing, we also shut out the very light that could heal us. The veil is, in part, the soul's way of saying, "I can't bear to feel anything right now." What it doesn't realize is that it has also muted its connection to the one thing it most needs to feel. And yet, even in the depth of this isolation, there are moments, brief, fleeting, when the veil thins. Sometimes it happens through tears, when the act of finally releasing what's been held inside softens the dense field. Sometimes it comes through a piece of music, a scent in the air, or a sudden memory that stirs the heart. These cracks are not accidents, they are invitations. The help that has been waiting rushes toward them, sending through as much light as the soul can bear in that moment. The veil of isolation may be one of the most excruciating experiences a soul can endure, but it is not permanent. It is not an unbreakable wall, but a shifting fog that can clear without warning. And when it does, the shock is not just in feeling the guidance return, it is in realizing it never left at all. What changes is not the presence of help, but the ability to receive it. If you've ever felt cut off in this way, convinced that even the heavens had turned their back on you, it's important to remember that perception is not reality. The light has been with you the entire time, standing just beyond the edge of what you could feel. And when the veil lifts, the soul begins to see that even in the darkness, it was never truly alone. In the moments after leaving the body, the soul is not yet entirely free from the residue of earthly life. Its movement, its direction, even the very texture of its surroundings, is influenced by the inner state it carries with it across the threshold. This is why some drift effortlessly into realms of light, while others feel an invisible gravity tugging them downward, toward heavier planes where the air feels thick and the light, if it is visible at all, hangs weak and far away. These are not punishments handed down from some external judge. They are the natural consequences of resonance, the same law that causes a tuning fork to hum in response to a matching pitch. The vibration you carry becomes the compass that points the way, and for some souls, that compass is set toward the lower realms. The pull is often imperceptible at first. In the immediate aftermath of death, the soul may still feel close to the living, hovering near familiar places and people. But beneath this, like an undertow beneath the surface of calm water, certain thoughts and emotions begin to exert their influence. If the soul is heavy with resentment, rage, or shame, those vibrations start to align it with regions where such energies dominate. It is not unlike stepping into a crowd and gradually realizing everyone around you shares the same mood, the same tone, the same heaviness. You have, without consciously choosing it, entered a place that mirrors what is inside you. These lower planes are not caricatures of hellfire and torment, but they can be deeply unsettling. They are spaces where beauty feels absent, where landscapes are gray and sounds echo in strange, hollow ways. Time here seems to stretch, and interactions with other souls are often colored by suspicion or conflict. This is because the inhabitants, like magnets, have been drawn there by similar vibrations, cycles of thought that replay old wounds, desires twisted into obsession, or identities built on fear and dominance. A newly arrived soul may not realize at first that they have entered such a place. They simply feel the weight grow heavier, the light dim further, and the sense of hope shrink. The pull toward these realms can begin long before physical death. Every unexamined grudge, every repeated pattern of cruelty, every moment of feeding the darker currents of thought without balance, adds weight to the soul's field. This weight is not visible in life, but in the spiritual realms it is unmistakable. A soul emerging from the body with a heart still clutched around bitterness or revenge is like a bird trying to take flight with stones tied to its wings. The stones do not have to be enormous, even small ones, if gathered in enough number, will keep the soul circling low, unable to rise. What is particularly striking in the descriptions of this pull is how it interacts with awareness. A soul that recognizes the heaviness, that admits to itself, "Something is wrong, I do not want to stay here," can begin to loosen its grip on the thoughts holding it down. That willingness alone sends out a signal that can be received by higher beings, prompting intervention or guidance toward lighter planes. But a soul that clings to its grievances, that insists the darkness around it is justified or even preferable, will find the pull becoming stronger. In such cases, the descent is not an act of being dragged away. It is the natural consequence of choosing to keep feeding a certain frequency. The imagery used to convey this in some accounts is that of a river with multiple branches. When the soul steps into the current at death, the waters immediately begin to sort themselves according to resonance. Those filled with joy, love, and gratitude find themselves swept toward clear, bright streams that open into vast oceans of light. Those bound by anger, fear, or deep selfishness feel the current draw them toward narrower, darker channels where the banks close in and the waters grow murky. There is no guard at the fork deciding who goes where. The current itself knows. For souls who arrive in these heavier planes, the shock can be profound. They may find themselves surrounded by others who speak in the language of old grudges, whose eyes carry the same shadows they feel inside. The landscapes, though varied, often reflect inner states, barren plains for the hopeless, endless mazes for the lost, cities of crumbling stone for those who cling to power without purpose. Some even create their own private enclosures, worlds shaped entirely by their thoughts, trapping themselves in repeating scenes that match their inner turmoil. Yet, it is important to understand that these lower realms are not final sentences. They are more like mirrors, reflecting back to the soul the truth of its vibration. This reflection can last what feels like days or centuries, depending on how quickly the soul is willing to shift its resonance. In some cases, the soul must confront the very thoughts and attachments that brought it there, feeling them in concentrated form until the desire to release them grows stronger than the habit of holding on. It is in these moments of surrender that the first cracks of light appear, opening the way for ascent. There are also those who venture into these planes intentionally, guides and rescuers who have mastered their own vibrations so completely that they cannot be claimed by the heaviness around them. They move through the shadows with a steady glow, seeking out the flickers of willingness among the souls present. Their task is not to drag anyone upward, but to offer a hand to those who, even in the smallest way, wish to change direction. For some, the sight of such a being is the first reminder that other realms even exist. The pull of the lower realms, then, is not a mysterious punishment, but the inevitable attraction of like to like. Every thought, every feeling, every intention generates a frequency, and in the spiritual world, frequencies find each other with unfailing accuracy. This is why the state of the heart and mind in life matters so deeply. Death does not erase these patterns, it magnifies them. The first moments beyond the body are less about judgment and more about exposure. the unveiling of exactly what you have been carrying all along. For those who have witnessed or studied these transitions, the message is clear. What you dwell upon becomes your path. If your thoughts are steeped in resentment, you will find yourself among the resentful. If your heart is open and generous, you will find yourself in realms where such qualities are the air everyone breathes. And if you awaken after death to find the pull drawing you towards shadow, the first and most vital act is to remember that movement is still possible. Even in the lower planes, the currents can be reversed. But it begins with one choice, the choice to turn your face toward a different kind of light. It begins as a whisper, a small, almost ignorable replay of something you wish you had done differently. At first, you might try to push it away, telling yourself it's just a passing thought. But in the silence of the soul's darkest hour, without the distractions of the physical world, that whisper grows louder. The moment, the choice, the words you spoke or failed to speak begin to loop. It's as if the memory has been placed in a vast, echoing chamber, and each repetition bounces back heavier, carrying with it not just the original event but the weight of your judgment against yourself. Time doesn't behave the same way here. There's no distance from what happened, no softening that usually comes with the passing of days or years. Instead, it is raw and immediate, as if you are still standing in that moment, over and over again. In this amplified space, guilt transforms from an emotion into an atmosphere. You breathe it in with every thought. You feel it seep into your being, tinting every memory with its presence. What makes this state so difficult is that the soul can't simply distract itself or shift its attention to something lighter. Without the physical senses to anchor it elsewhere, the focus is fixed on the inner landscape, and in that landscape the loudest sound is often regret. And regret has a way of weaving together unrelated events into a single damning narrative. A single mistake becomes the thread that seems to unravel an entire lifetime, convincing you that your worth is defined by the moments you mishandled. The echo chamber of regret doesn't just replay the events themselves, it adds layers. It invites "what if" into the room, and "what if" brings along an endless list of alternate outcomes that all seem better than the truth you lived. What if you had been kinder? What if you had spoken up? What if you had chosen differently at that one fork in the road? The mind becomes its own prosecuting attorney, presenting evidence that you have failed in ways that can't be undone. And here, in this state, there is no counter-argument. The jury is made up of your own doubts, and they have already decided the verdict. What many souls don't realize in this moment is that this amplification is not the universe punishing them. It is not an eternal sentence. It is the mind and heart, stripped of all external noise, finally facing what they never fully processed in life. In the living world, there are always ways to avoid this reckoning: busyness, entertainment, obligations, even sleep. But here, nothing interrupts the feedback loop. The soul is left with itself, and in that quiet, every unhealed wound becomes impossible to ignore. For some, the regret centers on harm caused to others, words spoken in anger, betrayals, neglect, moments when fear or selfishness won over love. For others, the regret is about opportunities missed, chances not taken, dreams abandoned, relationships never pursued. And for many, it is a combination of both, creating a storm of self-recrimination that feels like it will never end. The echo is relentless because it is fed by the soul's own energy. Every time you revisit the memory, you pour more power into it. Every time you rehearse the guilt, you make the sound louder. There is also a deeper reason why this happens. Regret contains within it the seed of transformation, but only if the soul can step out of the loop long enough to see it. This is why the amplification can feel so merciless. It is trying to force awareness to the surface, to make it impossible to continue ignoring the truth. But without the tools to process it, the soul can easily become trapped in the suffering without reaching the insight. It's like hearing a song you hate on repeat, knowing there's a reason it's playing but not being able to find the off switch. In some traditions, this state is described as a kind of self-created purgatory. Not a place of fire and punishment, but of mirrors, mirrors that reflect only the moments you most wish you could erase. Each reflection feels sharper than the last, because it is not just about the action, but about who you believe it proves you are. And here is where the echo chamber is most dangerous. It tries to convince you that your mistakes are your identity, that the worst thing you've done is the truest thing about you. This lie can hold a soul in darkness far longer than the original act ever could. But even here, there is a subtle truth hidden in the repetition. The loop is not endless by design, it is endless because the soul has not yet chosen to shift the energy it's feeding into it. The moment a sliver of compassion breaks through, even the smallest recognition that you were doing the best you could at the time with what you knew, the sound begins to change, the echoes soften. The chamber starts to lose its walls. It may take many such moments, like pebbles dropped into a still pond, but each one disrupts the pattern, creating ripples that weaken the hold of the memory. Sometimes, the first crack in the loop comes from the realization that those harmed by your actions may have already forgiven you. In the spiritual realm, connections are not limited by time, and forgiveness can move through unseen channels. There are countless accounts of souls who, while trapped in their own regret, were met by the very people they thought they had wronged beyond repair, only to be embraced, comforted, and told to let go. This doesn't erase the past, but it rewrites the meaning of it, allowing healing to take root where guilt once grew. Other times, the release comes from a deeper understanding of cause and effect, seeing how even painful events led to growth, or how your actions played a role in someone else's awakening, even if it was through difficulty. In this expanded view, regret begins to transform into responsibility, and responsibility is something you can act upon. You can take it into your next incarnation, or use it in the spiritual realm to aid others who are struggling. The echo chamber of regret feels inescapable when you are in it, because it convinces you that there is no outside, but there is always an outside. The soul's true nature is far greater than the sum of its mistakes. When the veil of self-condemnation lifts, the same events that once haunted you can become part of your power, reminders of how far you've come, and guides for how you choose to live from this moment forward. And so, the chamber that once felt like a prison can, in the end, become a place of passage. Not because the regret vanishes, but because it is transformed into wisdom. The loop breaks not when the past changes, but when the soul's relationship to it does. What once was a relentless replay becomes a chapter, one among many, in the vast book of who you truly are. There are moments in a soul's journey, both in life and beyond, when the presence of spiritual guides is felt so clearly that it is impossible to mistake. They appear in dreams, whisper encouragement into the heart, arrange synchronicities that defy logic. And yet, there are other times when their absence feels almost like abandonment, a silence where there was once reassurance, a distance where there was once closeness. To the soul experiencing it, especially in moments of struggle or confusion, this withdrawal can be deeply unsettling. It may feel like being left alone in the dark. But the truth is that this stepping back is rarely a desertion. It is, more often, a deliberate act of respect for the one thing even the most devoted guide will not override without cause: free will. In the realms beyond the physical, every soul carries the right to choose its own direction, even if that direction leads into shadow or pain. Guides can offer counsel, they can hold open doors, but they cannot drag a soul through them without consent. There is a wisdom in this restraint, for the deepest transformations are not imposed, they are chosen. When a guide senses that a soul has reached a crossroads where it must decide for itself, they may step back just far enough to let that decision carry its full weight. This is not an absence of care. It is the kind of love that refuses to deprive someone of the lessons that only self-choice can bring. From the soul's perspective, this distance can be agonizing. Without the subtle nudges and clear impressions they've grown accustomed to, they may feel adrift, questioning whether they have done something to lose the connection. In truth, the guide has not gone anywhere. They remain nearby, holding the perimeter, watching closely. But instead of steering, they wait. They let the soul wrestle with the uncertainty, knowing that what emerges from that struggle will belong entirely to the one who makes the choice. In the spiritual view, this ownership is essential. Lessons taken without ownership fade quickly. Lessons claimed through personal decision take root and alter the soul's trajectory forever. There is also the matter of resonance. A soul in the throes of certain vibrations, deep anger, despair, or defiance, can become difficult to reach in a way that will be heard. Guides understand that sometimes their continued presence during these states can actually prolong the resistance. It can become a tug of war, the guide pulling in one direction, the soul digging in the other. In such moments, the wiser path is to let the rope go slack. Without the tension, the soul is left to feel the natural consequences of its chosen vibration. The quiet, the space, the absence of external input, becomes the mirror in which the soul sees itself more clearly. But stepping back does not mean abandoning. In the accounts of those who have experienced such distance, there are often subtle signs that the guide is still keeping watch. A sudden insight that comes out of nowhere. A moment of unexpected peace in the middle of turmoil. A meeting with another soul, whose words or actions carry just the right message at the right time. These are the fingerprints of a guide working from the edges rather than the center, ensuring that the soul is never truly alone even as it walks through the valley on its own. The times when guides do choose to intervene directly are significant. If a soul's choices or state of being begin to lead it toward irreversible harm not in the bodily sense, but in a way that could lock it into destructive patterns for lifetimes, guides may step in more forcefully. Intervention can come in many forms: a vision so vivid it cannot be ignored, a dream that delivers truth in symbolic form, or even a sudden encounter that jolts the soul into awareness. These are not acts taken lightly. They are reserved for moments when the stakes are too great to leave entirely to free will without offering one last, undeniable opportunity to turn. Another reason guides may step back is to allow other forces to step forward. Every soul's journey is touched by many beings, not just one or two familiar presences. There are teachers, healers, and even souls from shared past experiences who may be better suited to help in a particular phase. The primary guide may step aside temporarily so that these other influences can do their work without interference. To the soul, the absence of the familiar can feel like loss, but it is often the opening needed for a new kind of growth. There are also situations where the guide's distance is a test, not in the punitive sense, but as a way to measure readiness. The spiritual path is not about dependence, and guides know that a soul must learn to access its own inner compass. By stepping back, they create the conditions in which the soul must practice listening inward, trusting its own knowing, without external confirmation. When the soul discovers it can navigate even without the constant presence of a guide, its confidence deepens. That confidence becomes a resource it will carry into every future challenge. In the lower realms, this stepping back can take on an even sharper edge. A soul caught in cycles of self-created suffering may feel entirely cut off from guidance. In truth, the guide may be watching more closely than ever, but they hold their position at a distance because direct contact would only provoke resistance or reinforce illusions. In these spaces, the smallest sign of willingness, a single thought of, "I want something different," can close the gap in an instant. When that willingness appears, the guide steps in again, often with a swiftness that feels like rescue. For those who long for the constant closeness of their unseen companions, it can be difficult to accept that love sometimes looks like letting go. But the stepping back of a guide is one of the highest expressions of respect for the soul's sovereignty. It says, "I trust you enough to let you walk this part yourself. I believe you can find the way," and when the soul does, the reunion that follows carries a depth of gratitude and recognition that could never be forged through constant intervention. Ultimately, guides are not here to live our lives for us, in the body or beyond it. They are here to walk beside us, to illuminate paths we might miss, to hold a steady presence when storms threaten to overwhelm. But they are also here to honor the sacred right to choose, to allow us to step into our own authority even if it means wandering for a while in the dark. In those moments when their presence feels faint, it is worth remembering that they have not left. They are simply giving us the space to claim what is ours, the power to navigate, the courage to decide, and the wisdom to walk forward knowing that whether near or far, they are always watching, always ready, and always waiting for the moment when their hand is needed again. It does not arrive with fanfare, nor does it always feel like a choice. The turning point of surrender often comes quietly, after the soul has exhausted every last ounce of resistance. It is the moment when struggling against the current no longer feels possible, when even the frantic grasping for answers gives way to stillness. For some, this is the deepest fall, the point where hopelessness becomes so absolute that there is nothing left but emptiness. For others, though they may not realize it at the time, it is the first step toward the light, because the fight to control the outcome has finally loosened its grip. Surrender in this sense is not about defeat in the way the world teaches it. It is not the waving of a white flag to an enemy. It is the release of the belief that you can, by sheer force of will, bend reality back into the shape you think it should take. For a soul weighed down by grief, regret, or confusion, the idea of letting go can feel like abandoning hope altogether. But in truth, what is being surrendered is the illusion of control, the desperate attempts to manage what is far beyond the human grasp. This is why it can be terrifying. The mind wants to cling to the familiar, even if the familiar is pain. In the spiritual sense, surrender can feel like stepping off a cliff into the unknown. For a time, there is nothing to catch hold of. You do not know if you are falling or floating. There is only the absence of the constant push and pull that has been draining your strength for what feels like forever. This absence can be disorienting. The soul, so used to defining itself through the struggle, doesn't quite know who it is without the battle. Some experience this as numbness, a kind of quiet where even the echoes of regret go silent. Others describe it as a profound stillness, where the noise of fear and self-condemnation fades enough to notice a faint, almost imperceptible light at the edges of awareness. For those who reach this moment at their lowest point, surrender may initially feel like the final collapse, as if they have been defeated completely. This is the dangerous edge, because if the soul believes that letting go is the same as giving up on life or meaning, it can sink even further into darkness. Here, the surrender is incomplete. It is laced with despair rather than trust. The energy still turns inward in self-destruction rather than outward toward possibility. Without the awareness that release can be a doorway, the soul might simply curl into the darkness and remain there. Yet for others, even in the midst of despair, there comes a subtle shift. It might be no more than a breath, a moment when the tension in the chest eases and something in them whispers, "I can't do this alone." That whisper, though small, is the crack in the wall. It signals that the soul has stopped trying to hold everything by itself, and in that moment, space is made for something else to enter. The light doesn't rush in like a flood. It seeps in slowly, almost shyly, testing the waters of a heart that has been closed for so long. In this way, surrender can be the most courageous act a soul performs in its darkest hour. It is the willingness to admit that it does not have all the answers, that it cannot see the whole picture, and that perhaps there is a higher rhythm at work even in the chaos. This kind of surrender is not passive, it is active trust. It is saying, "I will stop trying to force my way forward, but I will remain open to what comes." This openness is the beginning of the shift from the deepest night toward dawn. When the soul reaches true surrender, something almost imperceptible changes in the energy around it. Guides who have been waiting for the smallest sign of openness begin to move closer. Opportunities for healing, which had been invisible through the fog of resistance, start to shimmer faintly in the periphery. The weight of the struggle doesn't vanish instantly, but it no longer feels welded to the soul's very being. There is a little more room to breathe. And in that breath, the soul begins to sense that it is not entirely alone. Many describe this as a moment when they suddenly feel the presence of something greater, not necessarily in visions or voices, but as a deep, unshakable knowing that they are being held. Others say they simply felt a lightness, a loosening, as if unseen hands had lifted a fraction of the burden from their shoulders. The cause of this is not mysterious. When the soul releases the desperate grip it has on controlling the outcome, its vibration shifts. It becomes easier for higher energies to reach it, to infuse it with strength and clarity. This is why surrender can look so much like collapse, but hold such different outcomes. On the outside, the stillness may appear the same, but in one version, the stillness is a tomb, a closing in on oneself. In the other, it is a doorway cracked open to the possibility of something more. The deciding factor is whether the surrender comes with trust or with total despair. The former leads to transformation, the latter to stagnation. In the larger cycle of the soul's journey, this turning point is often remembered as the moment the tide shifted, even if it wasn't obvious at the time. It is the instant the rope of resistance slipped from tired hands, and the current, for the first time, was allowed to carry them. And though they may not have known it then, the current was always moving toward the light. The struggle had simply been keeping them swimming in circles, exhausting their strength, without bringing them any closer to peace. Surrender, then, is not the end of the road. It is the clearing of debris from the path. It is the deep exhale after years of holding the breath, the silent agreement between the soul and the unseen that says, "I will stop fighting against what is. Show me what can be." And once that agreement is made, even if it is only whispered into the dark, something answers. It always answers. If you've ever been at that edge, where the weight felt too great, where the struggle seemed endless, know that the moment you chose to loosen your grip, even if only out of exhaustion, you opened the possibility for light to enter. Whether you saw it right away or not, that was the beginning of the return. The turning point of surrender is not about falling further into the dark. It is about letting the dark carry you to the threshold of the dawn. The moment a soul, no matter how lost or burdened, allows the faintest spark of openness to help, something remarkable begins to unfold in the unseen. It does not require a grand gesture or an eloquent prayer. Often it is nothing more than a quiet thought whispered into the silence, "I don't want this anymore," or "I wish I could find a way out." That single shift in intent, however small, acts like a flare sent up into the spiritual atmosphere. It is noticed, it is felt, and immediately, energies and beings attuned to rescue begin moving toward it with a precision and urgency that defies the limits of physical time and space. These movements are not random. They follow an ancient order, one that has existed since the first soul wandered into shadow and needed help to return to the light. The instant the soul's vibration changes, even by a fraction, it sends out a signal that resonates along certain frequencies. Those who are attuned to those frequencies, whether they are guides, healers, or higher-order beings whose purpose is to assist in such moments, perceive it instantly. Distance does not matter. Realms do not matter. The resonance is unmistakable, and it draws them like a current draws a leaf into its flow. This is why such moments are sometimes described as rescue currents. They are not just beings moving toward the soul, they are energetic pathways opening around it. Pathways that begin to carry it toward safety even before it realizes what is happening. These currents are gentle yet powerful. They do not force, they do not impose. Instead, they surround the soul with subtle but undeniable movement, like a tide rising beneath someone who has been treading water for too long. The soul feels it first as a lessening of weight, a loosening of the heaviness that has kept it in place. Those who have described such rescues often speak of an almost imperceptible light appearing in the distance, not blinding, not sudden, but steady. Alongside this light comes a sense of presence, sometimes recognized as familiar, sometimes entirely new. These presences carry a vibration that is unmistakable, warmth, patience, and a love that expects nothing in return. They approach without judgment, without recounting the choices that led the soul into darkness. Their only concern is the openness that allowed them in, for that openness is the lifeline they will use to lead the soul upward. The rescue process is not always a direct extraction. Sometimes the beings who arrive first act as stabilizers, anchoring around the soul to keep it from slipping further into lower currents. This is especially important when the openness to help is still fragile, easily overturned by doubt, fear, or habit. The stabilizers create a sort of energetic cocoon, not a prison, but a shield, giving the soul enough breathing room to feel safe in its choice. In this protected space, the heaviness begins to thin. Thoughts once dominated by despair start to feel softer, less convincing. The soul is not yet in the light, but it is no longer entirely in the dark. For some, the rescue currents take the form of memory, a sudden recollection of a moment in life when they felt truly loved, or a vision of someone who once cared for them, rises unbidden to the surface. These memories are not accidents. They are carefully drawn forward by those working in the unseen, chosen specifically to remind the soul that it has known light before, and can know it again. Others experience the rescue as a shift in sound, distant music, a low hum, or the faint rhythm of a heartbeat that feels ancient and familiar. This, too, is intentional. The soul's energy responds to certain harmonics more easily than to words or images, and the beings guiding the rescue know exactly which tones will begin to dissolve the barriers. The journey through the rescue currents can be slow or swift depending on the soul's willingness. Some lean into it immediately, feeling the relief of being carried. Others resist even as they long for change, clinging to familiar patterns or fears. In these cases, the rescuers do not force, for to do so would violate the very freedom that allowed the soul to choose openness in the first place. Instead, they remain close, keeping the pathway lit, ensuring the current never fully disappears. They know that once the signal has been sent, the soul will eventually move toward it again, even if it drifts away for a time. There are also moments when the rescue becomes a collaboration between the unseen and the seen. A living person might dream of the soul in need, and awaken with an unshakable urge to pray, meditate, or send light to it. This human intervention merges with the rescue currents, strengthening them, providing a bridge between worlds. Such connections are rarely accidental. The bonds between souls are not broken by death, and sometimes it is the love of someone still in the physical that provides the extra momentum needed to bring a drifting soul back into safer waters. As the soul moves further along these currents, the environment around it begins to change. The oppressive landscapes of the lower realms, the dimness, the cold, the echoing emptiness, start to dissolve. Shapes soften, colors return, and the air feels lighter. The presence of the rescuers grows stronger, sometimes taking visible form. These forms vary according to what will most comfort the soul: a beloved relative, a trusted friend, or even a figure from a spiritual tradition that once inspired it. The beings themselves are not limited to these appearances. They choose them to ease the soul's transition, to replace fear with familiarity. Eventually, the current delivers the soul to a threshold, a place where it must decide whether to step fully into the higher vibration now available. The rescuers can carry it only so far. The final movement is always the soul's choice, for crossing this threshold means leaving behind certain patterns and attachments that may still hold some allure. Here, the openness that began the rescue is tested, expanded into a full willingness to move on. When the choice is made, the movement forward accelerates, and the light grows bright enough to banish any trace of the darkness left behind. The beauty of the rescue currents lies in their constancy. They do not depend on the magnitude of the soul's suffering or the length of its time in shadow. The moment even the smallest space for change appears, the process begins. There is no soul too far gone, no darkness too dense for the currents to reach. What matters is not the size of the opening, but the fact that it exists at all. The spiritual realms respond instantly to that spark, as if all of creation leans forward to say, "We have been waiting for this." For anyone still in the physical, this truth carries profound comfort. It means that no matter where a loved one's journey has taken them after death, the possibility of rescue is always present. It means that even in life, when one feels lost or surrounded by heaviness, the choice to open, even slightly, will set unseen forces into motion. And it means that the great love that governs these realms does not require perfection before it acts. It moves at the first sign of willingness, riding the invisible currents that have been flowing since the dawn of time, always ready to carry the soul home. They are not marked by glowing robes or halos, and they do not arrive with the thunderclap of miracles. In fact, most of the time, the lantern-bearers move quietly through the world, almost invisible to those who have never stood on the same cliff's edge they once faced. Their light is not blinding, it is steady, gentle, the kind that does not force your eyes open but coaxes them to adjust. These are the souls who have walked through their own darkest hour, stumbled in the same shadowed valleys where hope seemed extinct, and somehow found a way back. That journey changes them forever. It is not that they emerge unscarred, quite the opposite. The scars remain, but they no longer ache. Instead, they glow faintly, like lines of a map drawn from memory, marking the path they now know how to guide others through. A lantern-bearer's power is not in removing the darkness for someone else. They know too well that the night cannot be skipped. Instead, their strength lies in walking beside another soul who believes they are alone, showing just enough light to reveal that the path continues. It is this presence, not rescuing in the traditional sense, but illuminating, that can save a soul from sinking too far into its own isolation. They understand the weight of hopelessness not as an abstract concept but as something they once carried in their own chest, and because of that, their compassion is different. It is patient, without judgment, and it doesn't try to rush the one who is struggling. Many lantern bearers are not even aware of the role they are playing. A word spoken at the right time, a willingness to sit in silence without turning away, an act of kindness that expects nothing in return, these are the ways they carry the flame. They don't announce themselves as healers, they simply embody the proof that surviving the night is possible. And sometimes, for the soul still trapped in the dark, that proof is the first real thread of hope they've felt in months or years. In the spiritual sense, lantern bearers can appear in many forms. Some are still in the physical world, moving through everyday life, blending into crowds. Others no longer have a body, yet they remain near the living, drawn by the resonance of a struggle they recognize. In both cases, they operate almost like tuning forks, subtly shifting the vibration of those around them. Their presence makes the air a little lighter, even if the one in pain can't quite explain why they feel different when this person is near. Lantern bearers don't fear the darkness in others because they've seen its depths in themselves. They know that when someone lashes out, withdraws, or drowns in silence, it is not a sign of worthlessness but a symptom of the weight they are carrying. Instead of recoiling, they lean in, not to fix, but to accompany. Their light works slowly, chipping away at the belief that nothing and no one could possibly understand. They are living proof that someone has understood, and still does. One of the quiet truths about lantern bearers is that their light was often kindled by someone else's flame. Very few souls pull themselves entirely out of their darkest hour without any form of assistance. Somewhere along the way, a word, a gesture, or a moment of grace reached them. Sometimes it came from a stranger whose name they never learned. Sometimes it was a presence they couldn't see, felt only in the subtle easing of their burden for a moment. That light was passed to them, and when they were strong enough, they carried it forward. The cycle is ancient, no one holds the lantern forever, and no one walks without it forever. In the spiritual realms, the role of the lantern bearer can be even more literal. Some souls, after leaving the physical plane, choose to remain in the liminal spaces where others wander in confusion or despair. They carry energy that cuts through the fog, helping the newly departed orient themselves and remember where they truly belong. These encounters are often remembered by the living in near-death experiences, described as meeting a calm, glowing figure who radiated safety. That figure might not speak much, but the light they carry communicates more than words could. What makes lantern bearers so effective is not that they have all the answers. In truth, they often have very few. What they do have is a presence that says, "I know this place, I've been here, and there is a way through." For the soul lost in darkness, that is sometimes all that's needed to keep walking. The beauty of this role is that it is not reserved for a chosen few. Anyone who has survived their own deepest night has the potential to become a lantern bearer. The act of surviving plants the seed. Whether the soul chooses to nurture that seed into a steady light depends on many things: healing, self-awareness, and the willingness to walk back into the dark on behalf of someone else. That choice is not easy. It requires the courage to risk feeling the old weight again, even if only in memory, and the strength to remain centered while someone else's storm swirls around you. And yet, those who take up the lantern often speak of it as an honor. They remember what it felt like when someone held the light for them, even briefly, and they know how precious it is. The gratitude for having been guided once becomes the fuel for guiding another. This is not about repayment in the transactional sense, it is about the natural urge to pass on what saved you. In some cases, the lantern bearer's role becomes a life's calling. They might dedicate themselves to healing work, counseling, or spiritual guidance. In others, it remains something they do quietly, without titles or recognition. Both are equally powerful, because the essence of the role is the same: to hold the light steady until the one walking beside you can see enough to take the next step on their own. For those still trapped in their own darkness, recognizing a lantern bearer can be difficult. The mind might dismiss them, mistrust their presence, or feel unworthy of their light. But over time, something begins to shift. The flame they carry is not intrusive, it does not burn or blind, it simply illuminates, enough to reveal that the path does not end here. And once that is seen, it cannot be unseen. The lantern bearers walk among us, often unnoticed, yet they are threads of light woven into the very fabric of the human journey. They are living testaments to resilience, to the truth that the darkest hour is not the final chapter. And in carrying their light for others, they keep their own flame alive, ensuring that the cycle of hope continues, one soul at a time. It begins subtly, so subtly that at first the soul hardly notices. After what feels like an eternity in a place where every thought has been heavy and every moment has pressed down like a stone, there is a flicker. It is not yet joy, not yet release, but a shift, a thinning of the dense air that has surrounded everything. It might come in the form of a sound that doesn't belong to the darkness, a note of music, faint and sweet, weaving its way through the silence. Or it could be a color, barely perceptible at first, pressing through the grayness like the first hint of dawn pushing against a night that had seemed unending. This is the first breath of light, the moment when something inside the soul remembers that it was never made for darkness alone. It is not dramatic. It is not a sudden explosion of brilliance that drives away all shadow in an instant. Instead, it is more like the smallest crack opening in a wall that had seemed impenetrable, letting in a stream so delicate that the soul at first doubts it is real. For some, this breath comes as warmth, a sensation on the edges of awareness that feels almost like sunlight on skin, even though the soul has no physical body to feel it. For others, it is the sudden memory of a time when they laughed, loved, or felt safe. The memory is not summoned by effort. It arrives uninvited, slipping past the barricades the soul has built, and it brings with it the faintest thread of longing for something more. The most remarkable thing about this first breath of light is that it is often born in the same soil as the despair it begins to dissolve. The very recognition of pain, the moment when the soul admits, even silently, "I don't want this anymore," creates space for the light to enter. That space doesn't need to be large. It doesn't need to be deliberate. A flicker of curiosity, a sliver of doubt in the permanence of the darkness, is enough. The spiritual realms are always watching for that moment, because it signals that the soul's vision has shifted ever so slightly outward, toward the possibility of something beyond its own shadow. At first, the light is almost intangible. The soul may not even see it directly, but it feels a change in the quality of its thoughts. The loop of self-judgment, fear, or regret slows down for a breath or two. A thought that is not entirely soaked in heaviness drifts in. Maybe it's a question. What if there's another way? Maybe it's a remembering of someone's kindness, or the sensation of being held once upon a time. Even a single moment of mental stillness can be enough to notice this shift, and in that noticing, the breath of light becomes a little stronger. Those who assist in these transitions know exactly how to nurture it. They will not overwhelm the soul with too much light too quickly. That would only trigger resistance. Instead, they match the soul's readiness, weaving in small threads of brightness in a way that feels safe. They might shape the light into the form of a face the soul trusts, or let it manifest as the sound of a familiar voice calling their name. Sometimes they let it remain abstract, a warmth, a glow, a hum, so that the soul can lean toward it without feeling confronted. The light is never forced. It is invited, and in its presence, the atmosphere begins to transform. As the soul begins to notice, something remarkable happens. The light responds. It grows stronger not because some external hand is turning it up, but because attention itself feeds it. The more the soul allows itself to wonder about this light, the more space it makes for it to expand. This is why that first breath is so important. It breaks the closed circuit of the soul's focus on pain and creates a feedback loop in the opposite direction. The light grows as the soul notices it, and the soul notices it more as the light grows. This shift in perception does not erase all traces of the darkness. Shadows may still linger at the edges, whispering the same doubts and fears, but they no longer hold the same authority. The presence of even the smallest light changes the entire dynamic. The soul realizes, perhaps for the first time since entering this state, that the darkness is not absolute. There is something else, something that cannot be swallowed by it. That realization, once made, cannot be unmade. In some cases, the first breath of light brings with it a sense of being accompanied. The soul begins to sense that it is not alone, though it may not yet see who or what is with it. This is often the moment when the rescuers, who have been patiently holding position just beyond the soul's perception, allow their presence to be felt more clearly. They may step closer, letting the soul feel the brush of their energy, or they may send a thought that merges seamlessly with the soul's own. You are safe. This subtle contact reinforces the shift already underway. The soul's awareness expands just enough to entertain the idea that help is not only possible, but already here. The beauty of this stage is that it is self-reinforcing. Even the smallest curiosity about the light creates momentum. Each new flicker of hope, however fragile, adds to the illumination. The soul might still falter, turning away for moments at a time, but the memory of the light lingers. It becomes something to return to, a point of orientation in a space that had previously offered none. The first breath of light becomes the compass by which the soul begins to navigate toward its own healing. For the observers in the unseen, this is a sacred threshold. They know that what comes next will depend largely on the soul's willingness to keep leaning toward the brightness. But they also know that the hardest part, the initial shift from absolute despair to even the faintest hope, has been made. The rest of the journey may still be long, but the path has been opened. The breath of light has broken the seal, and from here, every step forward becomes easier. For anyone still in the physical who worries for a loved one lost in such a state, this truth offers profound comfort. The first breath of light can come from anywhere. A prayer whispered on their behalf, a memory they once cherished, a moment of stillness where they allow themselves to wonder. No soul is so deep in shadow that it cannot feel this shift. And once felt, it sets in motion a chain of events that will, in time, lead them home. When a soul has endured the collapse that comes with its darkest hour, there is often an assumption that recovery happens the same way it might for the body, a matter of time, rest, and a gradual return to strength. But the truth is far more intricate. The energy body, the subtle field that surrounds and interpenetrates the physical form, does not mend itself by chance. It has to be rebuilt, layer by layer, thread by thread, because in the depth of despair or trauma, those threads have not simply frayed, they have been torn. The collapse is not just an emotional low or a spiritual disconnection, it is a structural disintegration of the very lattice that holds the soul's light in a stable form while in a human body. In the immediate aftermath of such a collapse, the field often feels like a shattered web. The once cohesive flow of energy is fragmented, with holes where vitality should move, and tangled knots where it has stagnated. This is why exhaustion is so common after emerging from a deep spiritual crisis. The energy body can no longer distribute life force efficiently, and the body must compensate by drawing from reserves it does not really have. Even thinking clearly can feel difficult, because the channels that connect the heart, mind, and deeper intuition have been disrupted. The rebuilding begins with stillness, because the field cannot be rewoven while the soul is still thrashing in the turbulence of survival mode. In these early stages, the soul often has no appetite for large revelations or profound spiritual exercises. Instead, what it most needs is gentleness, small acts that slowly begin to re-establish the memory of safety. This might come through walking in nature, where the Earth's own electromagnetic field begins to harmonize the frayed edges. It might come through intentional breathing, which draws in life force and moves it through the cracks like a river finding new pathways. It might even come through physical touch, as the human body's own biofield resonates with another's, creating moments where the shattered lattice feels whole again, even if only briefly. These moments matter. Each one becomes a stitch in the slow mending of the fabric. The rebuilding of the energy body is not just about filling in the empty spaces, it is also about strengthening what remains, so that it can hold the weight of the soul's light without collapsing again at the first sign of strain. This is where awareness plays a vital role. If the collapse was born of long-standing guilt, fear, or unprocessed grief, the energy field will naturally try to protect itself by closing in those areas. But a closed area cannot heal. The soul must be willing to reopen those channels, not recklessly, but with care, allowing light to flow where it had been blocked. At first, this can feel like re-injuring a wound, because the sensations of vulnerability return. But over time, the renewed flow brings both vitality and resilience. In some traditions, this stage is compared to reforging metal. The soul's field, weakened and brittle from the collapse, is gently heated with the fire of attention and compassion, hammered into a smoother shape through consistent daily practices, and cooled in the waters of rest and trust. The process cannot be rushed. A rushed repair will leave hidden fractures that might split again under pressure. The soul must learn patience here, not the kind of patience that simply waits, but the active patience that tends to a garden, knowing the sprouts will come in their own time. The rebuilding also involves a kind of retuning. When the soul's energy body is damaged, its frequency can become distorted. This distortion acts like static in a radio signal, interfering with the clear reception of guidance, inspiration, and even joy. Through practices like sound resonance, chanting, certain forms of prayer, or simply surrounding oneself with harmonizing music, the soul can slowly bring its field back into alignment. The tones act like a tuning fork, shaking loose the density that clings to the broken threads, allowing them to vibrate freely again. One of the most overlooked aspects of rebuilding the field is that it rarely happens in isolation. Just as a broken bone benefits from external support, such as a cast or splint, the energy body often draws stability from the presence of other healthy fields. Spending time with those who radiate stability and kindness is not just emotionally soothing, it is energetically restorative. In these interactions, the weakened field subconsciously mirrors the stronger one, relearning the patterns of coherence it once held naturally. Over time, these borrowed patterns are internalized, and the soul can maintain them without leaning so heavily on others. As the rebuilding progresses, the soul begins to notice subtle but significant changes. Dreams, once fragmented or absent, start to return with a sense of clarity. The sense of weight in the chest or dullness in the mind begins to lift, replaced by moments of spontaneous lightness. These are not permanent at first, but they grow in frequency. The soul starts to sense connection again, not just with other people, but with the unseen network of life itself. It is like standing on a shoreline after months lost at sea and feeling the tide touch your feet for the first time. Eventually, the mending moves beyond repair and into strengthening. The field, once fragile, becomes more resilient than it was before the collapse. This is not because the soul will never face darkness again, but because it now carries within its lattice the memory of having been rebuilt. That memory is a kind of spiritual muscle, a reminder that even if the structure shatters again in some future storm, it can be woven back together. The new threads are thicker, the knots more secure, and the flow of light within them steadier than before. In the final stages, the soul often feels an unexpected gratitude for the collapse that once felt like its undoing. This gratitude is not for the pain itself, but for what the rebuilding revealed, the depth of its own endurance, the generosity of unseen helpers, and the truth that the field is not a fragile ornament, but a living, breathing part of its being, capable of renewal. From this place, the soul can step forward, not as one who fears breaking, but as one who knows how to rise. There is a strange alchemy that happens in the unseen realms, a transformation that can only occur in the deepest night of the soul. When a being has walked through the thickest shadows, when every illusion of safety has been stripped away and every comforting light has seemed distant or gone, something begins to take shape in the silence that follows. It is not instant. It does not come with a triumphant cry or sudden enlightenment. It grows quietly, like a seed germinating beneath the soil, unseen by the world above. This is the gift hidden in the darkness, and it is often so profound that the soul who emerges from it will one day see the descent not as a punishment, but as a preparation. To survive such a stage is to confront the raw truth of one's own being. In the shadowed places, there is no room for performance, no audience to impress, no illusions to maintain. The soul meets itself in its most unguarded form, the flaws it denied, the fears it hid, the grief it never acknowledged. And in that meeting, something essential happens. The soul learns that even when stripped of everything it thought it was, something remains. That something is the indestructible core, the fragment of the eternal that no shadow can erase. Finding it in the dark is like discovering a small flame in a cave that has never seen sunlight. It may be fragile at first, but it is enough to navigate by, and it is entirely one's own. When that flame is recognized, it changes the way a soul moves through existence. No longer is its sense of self tied to circumstance or the approval of others. Having faced the void and still found a spark of light within, the soul understands a truth that cannot be learned from comfort alone, that the source of light was never external to begin with. The darkness becomes the teacher that strips away every distraction until only the essence remains. That realization alone births a kind of quiet strength, one that does not rely on constant reassurance to endure. But the gift does not end with strength. Emerging from such depths often leaves the soul with an expanded capacity for compassion that it could not have gained otherwise. In the shadow, the soul has tasted isolation, hopelessness, and the weight of pain that feels endless. Those experiences carve deep channels in the heart, making room for an understanding that is not intellectual, but felt. The soul can now recognize the subtle signs of another's suffering, the faint tremor in a voice, the quiet withdrawal of a presence, the heaviness in someone's energy that others might overlook. This recognition becomes almost instinctive, and with it comes the urge to reach out, not to fix, but to be present, to hold space in the way the soul itself wished someone could have held space for it. This is why some of the most luminous beings in the spiritual realms are those who have passed through their own darkest hours. Their light is not naive. It is not the product of never having been tested. It is forged in the fire of despair, tempered by the long nights where they thought no one was listening. Such light is steady, unshaken by passing storms, because it remembers the time when the storm was all there was, and still it endured. These souls carry an authenticity that cannot be faked. When they tell another, "You will make it through this," there is a resonance in their words that only comes from having been there themselves. On a deeper level, the gift hidden in the darkness is also one of alignment. In walking through despair, the soul encounters the full spectrum of its own vibration, from the densest frequencies to the lightest. This journey allows it to understand itself in a more complete way. Many souls who have never faced such a descent carry within them untested parts of their being, shadows they avoid, wounds they keep covered. But the one who has survived the darkness has explored these regions fully, and in doing so, they integrate them. They no longer fear their own depths, which means they can navigate the depths of others without losing themselves. There is also a curious shift in perspective that tends to follow. When a soul returns to a place of light after such a journey, it does not take that light for granted. Moments of joy are savored with an intensity that others might overlook. The colors of the world seem richer, the small acts of kindness more potent, the simplest pleasures like sunlight or laughter carry an almost sacred quality. This is because the soul remembers what it is to go without them, and that memory shapes its gratitude in a way that is both humbling and uplifting. Some who have walked this path discover that their purpose going forward is tied directly to what they endured. They may choose to guide others through similar passages, to stand as living proof that the darkness is not the end. Others may express their gift through creative or healing work, pouring their understanding into art, words, music, or acts of service that carry the vibration of their hard-won wisdom. In whatever form it takes, the gift serves as both a beacon and a bridge, a beacon to those still lost in shadow, and a bridge connecting the realms of despair and hope. It is important to note that this gift is not always recognized immediately. In the early stages after emerging, a soul may still feel fragile, uncertain, and even resentful of what it went through. Time and reflection often reveal the deeper transformation. The harshness of the journey softens in memory, replaced by the awareness of how much has been gained. And as the soul integrates this experience, it begins to see that the darkness was not an interruption of its path, but an essential part of it. In the grand tapestry of spiritual evolution, these passages through darkness serve a vital role. They strip away the unnecessary, reveal the eternal, and expand the heart. The wisdom gained cannot be undone. Once a soul has learned to find light in the absence of all visible sources, it carries that skill forever, across lifetimes, across realms. And in every encounter thereafter, whether with joy or with sorrow, it brings the unshakable knowledge that there is always a way forward, even when it cannot yet be seen. This is the gift hidden in the darkness. It is not given freely, it is earned, and once it is earned, it becomes part of the soul's eternal nature, shaping everything it will ever be. In time, the soul may even come to look back on its darkest hour not with bitterness, but with a strange reverence, knowing that in that place where it thought it would be lost forever, it found the most indestructible part of itself. There comes a moment, often after the storm has raged so long that the soul has forgotten what stillness feels like, when a quiet realization begins to form: it was never truly alone. This understanding doesn't arrive with the fanfare of trumpets or the sudden blinding light so often imagined in tales of awakening. Instead, it comes like the first pale hint of sunrise touching the edges of a long black horizon. There is no dramatic shift in the outer world, but something within loosens, and the soul can finally see that even in its most desperate hour, it was being carried by something unseen. The path it had walked, which seemed like nothing more than a descent into endless shadow, was in fact a narrow tunnel leading toward light. That light, though faint at first, is more than illumination. It is the memory of connection, of truth, of home. The eternal reminder is this: there is no darkness so deep that it can erase the soul's belonging to the source. The illusions of separation are powerful, and when despair grows thick, they feel unbreakable. But they are illusions nonetheless. Dissolving the moment even the smallest spark of hope is allowed to enter. That spark might come from a voice that speaks kindness into the silence, from a dream that stirs long-forgotten strength, or from a sudden awareness that the heart is still beating despite everything. These moments are proof that the thread between the soul and the divine has never frayed, no matter how convincingly the darkness has tried to hide it. For some, the threshold between the darkest hour and the dawn is marked by surrender. Not the kind of surrender that means defeat, but the surrender of laying down the belief that one must carry the weight alone. In releasing this burden, the soul creates an opening wide enough for light to pour in. This light does not need to come with all the answers, or the immediate removal of pain. It comes first as presence, the reassurance that the soul is seen, heard, and held, and from that presence, healing can begin. The dawn is not always instant, but once the first rays touch the spirit, the return to wholeness has already begun. The reminder also speaks to a deeper truth about the nature of the soul's journey. The cycles of descent and return, of shadow and light, are not flaws in the path, they are part of it. It is often in the descent that the soul discovers the rawest truths about itself. It learns where its strength is born, who it becomes when stripped of comforts, and how much it is willing to fight for its own light. Paradoxically, the places that feel furthest from the divine often become the very ground where the strongest bond with it is forged. The dawn after such a night is not a return to what was before, but the birth of something new, something stronger and more awake. Many traditions speak of the darkest hour as a sacred threshold. It is not a dead end, but a gate, one that requires the soul to pass through empty-handed, carrying nothing but its essence. To walk through this gate is to face the shadows not as enemies to be destroyed, but as parts of the self that are ready to be seen and transformed. This is why those who have crossed it often carry a light that is unmistakable, not because they have avoided suffering, but because they have faced it, endured it, and allowed it to teach them without letting it define them. And so, the eternal reminder is not merely a comfort, it is a call. It is the quiet urging to remember, in the midst of whatever darkness may come, that there is always something beyond it. The blackest night sky still holds the unseen stars. The deepest winter soil still cradles seeds that will one day push toward the sun. The most painful endings can be the soil from which the most profound beginnings grow. To remember this is to disarm the despair that seeks to convince the soul it has reached its final chapter. This truth is not only for those walking through their own shadowed valleys, but for those who encounter others lost within them. To carry the eternal reminder is to be a bearer of light, even in the smallest ways. Sometimes it is a steady presence, a listening ear, or a single phrase spoken at the right time that plants the seed of hope in another's heart. The threshold to dawn is often crossed not in isolation, but with the unseen or unacknowledged assistance of others whose own lights have survived their darkest nights. And yet, the reminder extends further still. It tells us that dawn is not a one-time event. There will be other nights, other seasons when the light fades and the path narrows, but each time the soul remembers it has crossed before, the darkness loses some of its power. The memory of light becomes a compass, guiding even when the way is unclear. This is why the soul that has endured its darkest hour walks differently, not without fear, but without the same vulnerability to forgetting that the light is always waiting. Ultimately, the eternal reminder is not a philosophy or belief to be memorized. It is an imprint on the soul itself, etched through experience, sealed by survival, and confirmed by the return of light. Once it is known in the marrow of being, it cannot be truly lost again. In this way, the darkest hour does more than test the soul, it crowns it. The very journey through shadow becomes the reason the dawn feels so impossibly beautiful, so profoundly worth living for. And perhaps that is the final truth, that the light is not something the soul must reach for endlessly, as if it were far away. It is already within, waiting for the moment the soul turns inward enough to see it again. Every darkest hour, no matter how final it feels, is simply another turn in the long spiral that leads back to that inner light. When the veil lifts and the horizon brightens, the soul understands at last. The dawn was never coming from outside. It was rising from within all along.